Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Paige.
We are just getting started here. I see some attendees getting into our meeting here. Got 14, 15, it's growing. Well, we are going to go ahead and just kick this right off. Welcome to the webinar, Holistic Decision Making. We have our presenter today, Byron Shelton, and I am Paige Youngstrom with the Savory Institute team. I help to manage the virtual events as well as the in-person events when we have them. And yeah, just wanted to go ahead and hit off with a few housekeeping items, and then we will move on into our presentation. A quick agenda, basically the housekeeping items by myself, and then Abby will take over for a quick topic introduction as well as introductions to our presenter Byron and also Jody Butterfield, who is on the line as well. We will then dive into, Byron's presentation and then follow up with a quick conclusion. First of all, we do have everyone muted so we can kind of lessen the distraction. So you're automatically muted. If you do have questions, please utilize the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to ask the questions as they come up. We will be kind of pausing after each section for Jody and Byron to answer any questions that do arise. Please avoid using the chat box for these questions as they will not get captured in our recording, and this helps to inform our future webinars. So once again, utilize the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. So Abby and I will both be monitoring these items, and like I said, Jody and Byron will be answering them throughout the presentation. Also, just another note, if you can please, remove any distractions that you have, put away or mute your cell phones, close any other windows on your computer, just to get the most out of the presentation today. Without further ado, I want to introduce Abby Smith, our Global Network Coordinator, and she will speak a little bit more about the presenters and the topic.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paige. It's so exciting to start my day. It's about 8 a.m. in California. I know it's very different times for everyone here. We have a really global audience, which is so exciting, and just so excited to be here with all of you. The point of this webinar was to really enhance the literacy around holistic management throughout our network, because holistic decision making is the essence of holistic management. That's what makes us different. It makes us not just a grazing program, not just another tool or technique, but something completely different from anything else that's offered out there. And we need to be supporting each other and helping each other and continuing to learn. And that's really the essence and the spirit of forming this webinar and bringing us all together this morning or this evening. And it's led by Byron, who's our Senior Program Director. I was looking through the list, and I'm not sure if anyone on this list does not know Byron. I think most of us have been trained by Byron. I know I certainly was. He's had a huge influence on my life and my understanding and practice of holistic management. I think he is the best educator out there. And I'm so grateful and honored to be on his team and working with him. And then we actually are joined by Jody Butterfield, who is the organizing force behind holistic management as a body of knowledge. And she's in Zimbabwe now on lockdown with a lot of elephants and other wild creatures that are, she says, roaming around quite a bit now that there's no tourists. So Jody is joining us from Zimbabwe, and she's here to answer questions and provide some more insights, but because of her connection, she won't be able to do a lot of presenting. So Byron's going to lead us in that. So Byron, I'd like to turn it right over to you and jump into this.
Thank you. I'm sharing my screen here. Tell me when it comes up there, Abby.
Yep, got it. Looks great.
Good deal. There we go. Full screen. Is that up?
Full screen. Looking good.
Well, I can't see the list now of who's on there, but I welcome everybody. Whether you're new to the network or been around a while, it's always good to review the basics of the real fundamentals of holistic management, which really drops right down into the decision-making, the foundational elements of holistic management. So today, we've got an hour. We have an ambitious goal of wanting to give you the whole process, get your arms around the whole decision-making piece. At the same time, Abby, one question for you is, are you seeing my screen that shows the photos?
I don't see it now. What I
Okay,
see
good.
is I see the presentation that says
Good.
today's together. Okay.
So they're not blocking part of where I need to put it on the screen.
Yeah.
Back to this, we really want to give a little bit more than an overview. We want some depth to come through. And yet at the same time, I gotta move this one more time to get my remote to work. At the same time, we are wanting to get 3 things. There we go. We're wanting to cover more than time will allow, which is all right. It's okay to, if you're new, to have piqued your interest and you need to go study. After all, this is a 2 or 3 day course to learn in depth and to practice. We will answer a few questions as we go at specific points. They may not be able to get to all of them. If not, Abby will kind of summarize the general gist of a few questions. So with that, I'm going to give you about 30 seconds, and I would like you to think about yourself, your farm, your business, maybe the family. What are some goals you have for that family, for that unit? You can write them down or just keep them in your mind. Now, if we were together on a whiteboard, I'd draw a line across it. And there's many ways to do this, but I found this works pretty well. I would ask you to share some with me, and I would write them on this whiteboard. Some of the ones on the line might look like this: purchase breeding sheep or livestock, go to college, hire an employee, make a profit, build fences, put in a water trough, contribute to a local food drive, or begin an apprentice program. All very good things to think about doing. But as you'd been sharing some of the things you'd been thinking, I would have put some above the line. They might have been things more like this: become financially independent, improve the ecosystem, become a lifelong learner, support the local community, provide learning opportunities for others, et cetera, et cetera. And then I would ask you, what is the difference here between the 2 categories? Eventually, we'd have a discussion a little more back and forth in person, but the bottom is the how-tos, how to get there, the ways to do things, the actions. Or if we think about ends and means, these are the means, again, the actions to get there, where the real true values of what we desire are above the line. These are the ends. We need to remember this. We'll build this into our holistic context later. But the real point here and the purpose of this is we are trying to separate out what are our true values, the true ends we want, from the thousands of actions and ways we get there, or the means, because there is forever a list of ways to get there. And if you think about where do we argue or have conflict, or at least disagreement, it's more on the actions and the ways than it is on the goals. And if we can truly get our goals and values in line, then we can have better discussions with others about the ways to get there. So one concept here that I wanted to get across right away was, when I asked you to list some goals, I did not give you any description or definition of a goal. We need to make sure that we understand there's a difference between true values, what really means something to us, and actions and ways to get there. So as you think back through some of those goals you thought of when I asked you a few minutes ago, when we get off the call at some point, list down, well, which category were they in, above the line or below, and then figure out corresponding items to go with it on the other side of the line. A second thing that I'd like you to think about before we get into this: decision making in either complicated or complex situations. Talk about this for a minute. This made a lot of sense to me when Alan first went over this with me. In complicated decision making, when we're making that are this way, there tend to be fewer options. It's like, if we do this, the answer is going to be A or B. If we do that, it's going to be C or D. It's pretty cut and dried, and there's nothing changes along the way. It's a very linear reasoning process, and it works pretty well. We use it a lot, although many times we leave out considering external costs of what we do. But examples of this are, we've done some very complex, very complicated things. There's 3 examples there. Putting a man on the moon, building a computer, repairing an engine, the list could go on. It's very linear. Things don't change much as we make our choices, not as much. In very complex situations, at each decision point, this is different. There are multiple variables, and anytime any one of them changes, the others all change, and it tends to evolve and keeps going. It doesn't just break. Like when an engine breaks down, one part breaks, it stops. It doesn't evolve itself and keep going. In complexity, it does. And in these situations, there's a great need for a holistic reasoning process. It keeps us looking at the whole picture of all 3 of those aspects: economic, environmental, and social. So some examples here would be those 3 things: managing the environment, our finances, our social relationships. This is what a lot of us in land management, farming, ranching, agriculture, managing open space, we're managing these 3 things. These are the soft sciences as compared to things more complicated or hard sciences. So managing complexity is not rocket science. It's harder, if you think about it, because we truly have put a man on the moon, and yet we're living here in eroding watersheds in communities that are struggling financially, and we don't have all our social relationships always worked out. So we need a different way to manage. So holistic management, really complicated in general, if I made a general statement, is things we make. Alan will say complexity is things we manage. So there's a big difference. And we're about management right now with holistic management, decision-making, land and communities and families. So we're really proposing that holistic management is a reasoning process allowing us to manage complexity and somewhat stay in control, or at least be able to manage what's going on. Families or land managers, one of the actions that comes through that leads to their value of financial is many times profits go up. At the same time, building biological capital. If we manage complexity, this means our values have a greater chance of being reached. Not all our individual actions, but the true values. So far we talked about we need to understand there's a difference in our goal thinking between values, true deep values, and actions to get there. And we're managing something different when we're managing complicatedness versus complexity. So with that, Abby, let's take a few minutes here. We'll allow about up to 5 minutes for some questions. And if we don't use it all, we'll use it later. So we'll move on. Do you have anything at this point?
I don't have any questions that have come into the question box. I have so many thoughts in my own minds, and probably others do as well. If you do have a question, please feel free to chat it into the Q&A box if you'd like, and then we can call on you. Yeah,
it's okay right now. People are thinking we can expand the question boxes later. Sure. And I've actually left a few slides built in the context checks when we get there, where if questions have taken our time to that point, I'll do that a little slower, Abby, and at the other time we can expand on that a little bit more. So we can adapt the time as we go.
Great, that sounds awesome. Sounds awesome. I know it's a lot to jump into, but I just wanted to reflect, Byron. I remember when you did the values and actions when I took your course, when I was becoming an accredited professional. And I remember when you just drew that line on the whiteboard, that was so effective. And then you wonder what's going to go on top, what's going to go on back, why is he putting it in the different places? It's a great training technique to help people understand and really cement it in. So.
Cool, good. Well, let's move forward. And remember, all of this is available in a Holistic Management textbook written by Julie Allen, online through the multiple ways. And so what we're doing here is trying to get a quick overview, but with some depth, but quick enough to get the whole picture.
Great.
So let's move on then. there's really 4 key questions we're asking in holistic management decision making. We're asking you to be clear on identifying what you're managing. You know, if this is complexity, we've got to know clearly, well, what are we managing and what are we not? Be clear on defining what we desire. Filter our different options, actions we can take to help know, will they keep us in line with our desires? And then after we've made a choice, be able to monitor those decisions to assure desired outcomes, because things change all the time along the way. So let's take the first one of those. When we say be clear on what you're managing, that's where the term the whole comes in, the whole under management in holistic management body of knowledge. Are we identifying these 3 items? The correct decision makers, the resources we have to work with, the resource base, and the money we have. So let's take a quick look. Each of those, though, there's the concept of multiple wholes or overlapping wholes. There's an individual, there's a family. The family may be overlapped with a farm or some other business. So whatever decision you're trying to make, you've got to recognize, well, what whole is this decision relating to? And then is that whole defined? So with decision makers, who are they? It's assumed sometimes who they are, but it's not always clear. Some people are decision makers, others are not, but they'll act like it, or you let them act like it, to really give thought to, get right down to which group of 2 groups of people fit into. Are they a decision maker or do they influence decisions? So right here, we want to get clear on who are the decision makers. Sometimes thinking through what are their roles and responsibilities can help us define if they're a decision maker or not. Actually sort out some things maybe that weren't sorted out that needed to be before. And this question here, who can veto any decisions? This is a catch to help make sure we didn't leave somebody out who really is a decision maker. Maybe only once a year on a major decision, but if that's the decision you're talking about at this point, they need to come into that decision-making pool. Maybe on day-to-day decisions, they're not in the decision-making pool. That can change. Let's go to the resource base. We've got physical and then human. Physical, what do you have? Do you truly have use of land? And ownership is not, it's do you have management control? It's not whether it's leased or owned. Same with equipment, same with machinery, office equipment. What resources? And you know, we keep a lot of this in our head, and actually this whole concept of holistic decision making, we all do at some level intuitively. But when we get into larger complex situations of managing land, people, and money, we need to think it through deeper. And sometimes that means taking something like this and writing it down, making a list of what we have. Now, the other group of people that are not decision makers are ones you can influence, or they're influenced by what we do, or they can influence us positively or negatively. I kind of avoid the term stakeholders because that includes many times decision makers, plus those who are close enough by to influence or be influenced, and everybody else and their brother. And really, we don't have to consider that far out as far as direct decision making. We do need to consider the health of the community and the people, but who are those who really are close enough they can influence us, and what knowledge and skills do they have that we can draw on? We want to use them to help us, not only to help to align them with what we're doing so they support our business, maybe buy our product, but we can draw on them. So it's a distinct group from decision makers. The third piece under the whole, you got decision makers and resource base, is the money. We tend to think about only what we've got on hand, but what can be generated through what we do as we choose to do different enterprises, different activities. What can we generate? How can we create income? How can we have wealth generating expenses that go with that? So a recap on the whole, identifying what we're managing, those 3 items. It needs to be clear And then which whole are we discussing? And each different whole would have a different set of decision makers, different resource-based items, and possibly different money available. So with that, let's stop for a minute. I will say many times we're asked, do you have a holistic context? Which we'll go to next. But you can't really have a holistic context until you've designed the whole under management. If you're discussing holistic context, you can back up and develop it as you go, but it needs to be developed. So Abby, any questions? And I've also asked Jody if there's not if she has anything she'd like to add or share.
Yep, no, I do have some questions, and I can always count on my friend Christopher to ask a question. So I really do encourage everyone to put your thoughts into the Q&A. Feel very welcome to do that. The more we have in here, the more reflections, thoughts, questions, the better we can make our future webinars and the deeper and richer our conversation today can be. So again, like Paige said, the Q&A is saved. So Christopher put in a question or a statement, a thought, maybe he'd like you to expand on it. Prior to the publication of the last book, so the third edition of Holistic Management, Alan drew an important distinction between the use of holistic goal and holistic context, the latter he argued being critical to the practice. Do you want to maybe address that, Byron?
Sure, but I'm going to give Jody an option first. And Jody's bandwidth goes in and out. So Jody, would you like to address some of the thoughts that you and Alan gave into why you moved from a holistic goal to holistic context?
Yes, let me, I hope this works. Yeah, the whole reason we made that change was, we think of the holistic context as really a way of being. It is not something you're ever going to reach, but it is a statement of who you are and what you're aspiring to in the bigger sense. You know, as Byron said, values come into that, but it's not something that you're striving for in terms of a goal. It is how you want to be, and so that's one of the reasons we came up with. We said, no, it's really the context for your decision making and management. It's not really the goals, because goals we want to have, and we have lots of them, and they're a separate idea, and the goals are things that we will we'll hold them separate, because those are something that are going to change, and we're going to achieve them sometimes, and sometimes we're not. When we have the context, that's what lies beyond the goals, and so we never lose sight of what's really important to us, and that's what we want to express in the holistic context.
Thanks, Jody. I remember going through training with you and Ellen, and it was the word holistic goal, two separate words, and then it went to holistic goal as one word, and now holistic context. But the reasoning, the thing I learned was that all along from the beginning, the desire was to have it understood as the way you just explained it. It was finding the right words to bring that across. And I know in all of our experiences, holistic context is sure making an easier sense of people grasping what the meaning of it is really to be. Hope that helps, Christopher. Any other question there at this point, Abby?
Byron, there are not other questions. Wait, there might be one. Let's see. Oh, Bart, hello from Belgium. He says, just a practical question. Will the slides be made available after the webinar? Paige, I think that one's for you.
Actually, I will let Byron take that as this is his presentation. So
okay. The recording
sure.
Definitely will.
The recording
yes,
will be.
I will be distributing a recording. That is correct.
Bart, the recording will be, as we're moving from all of our face-to-face training to more virtual training, we're in the process of developing PowerPoints that we can release. We can, the answer right now is I don't know if this one's exactly ready to go, but we're moving to that. So that's where we are at this point.
Okay, great. And Christopher says, thanks, Byron. And then an anonymous attendee, wow, that's exciting, says, Jody or Byron, can you provide a real life example of using holistic decision-making that is unrelated to managing land and livestock?
Anytime you're working with a family that is dealing with making choices, they may not be managing the land directly. Anything to do with their finances or any other things they want to do, actions they take, would easily can be run through what is the family's whole, what is their context, and those context checks, which are these sections we're going to go through here, applies. A real live example, anything from do we sell this car, buy a new car, to do we move from here to another region, do we take another job? All those are actions that are driven by our context and our values, which means, to go a little beyond your question there, many people have very well-defined values in their head of what they want and who they are, but seems to be just as many folks who are driven by actions and go their whole life and really never got clear on what it was they were really desiring and taking actions to live that life they wanted. So there's no way it doesn't apply anywhere. You're managing a whole, whatever that whole is defined to be. Jody, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Oops. No, I thought that was good. I mean, we could give lots of examples just from Savory Institute or from any of the hubs or whatever. I mean, we're not directly managing land unless we talk about West Bijou, but which is a separate kind of whole. But just managing ourselves, and yeah, I mean, we have lots of decisions we have to make that have nothing to do with managing land. It has everything to do with managing a business and a network and our place in it.
Yeah, that's for sure. And you mentioned Savory Institute. We have 12 people. We're some in Colorado, some scattered around. We meet face-to-face and virtually, and we're making choices all the time. We're really working hard to practice holistic management within Savory Institute as an organization, all the way from our actions to our finances. Abby?
Yeah. Sorry, Byron, didn't mean to interrupt. Actually, Bobby Gale, our marketing director, wrote a really great blog post, an article about how we decided as the Savory Institute to not have our global network gathering in Australia. And I know Bobby's on. Maybe, Bobby, you could post the link in the chat to that article that you wrote. But we had to make a decision about, before everything was really clear with COVID, if we should go to Australia or not. And we used the framework to make that decision. And it was a very complex decision with constantly changing information. And I was really proud of the way that the team made the decision, and I learned a lot. So Bobby, I don't know if you can hear it. If you don't, I'll post the link to everybody. It's a good read. Thanks.
Very good. Thanks, Abby. Well, let's move on. We're going to talk about the second part. The first one is define what we're managing, the whole under management. This next piece is really then, what is it we desire or want? That's not a selfish question when it's asked by an individual or a business when they're considering everybody around them in that same context. In fact, if you're taking care of yourself and those around you, it's easier to help others or support others. One thing I'll point out at the beginning, though, is sometimes an organization or a division within an organization may have been formed for a specific purpose. And if that's the case, they should review that and have a 1, maybe 2 sentence statement that says, this is why we exist. I know many organizations that have forgotten that. Their goals list is all actions, and it's a mile long, and they'll never get them all done. And they can't know really what to do and what takes priority because they don't have their whole defined. They don't have their decision makers really defined, and they don't have a statement of purpose. So it's an easy way for an organization to lose its way without a statement of purpose. And their holistic context should reflect that purpose. Most family farms or ranches don't need a statement of purpose. Now, let's talk about this context briefly. Define it clearly. Well, it has 2 pieces: quality of life or values and the future resource base. Now, let's think about that top one. That quality of life value statement, the things you did early on, half hour ago, 20 minutes ago, above the line, those are the values, not the list of specific actions. We want the values of what our whole in what we want it to be like. This is now in the second item there, future resource base. We had the resource base in the whole of physical and human. Now we're describing here, what does it have to be like in the future for us to have that quality of life? Who defines this holistic context? Not the people that are in the resource base that we draw on, the influencers, but the decision makers. So we need clarity in who they are, because they write this, they discuss it, they define it, they review it. As they hire new people on board who are decision makers, they bring them into it, or they start it over with them. They have that context comes from the decision makers. Things to be considered here in how you want your life to be in this whole, this job, this farm, this family, economic well-being, financial independence, for example, debt-free or a limited amount of debt. Define. Profit is a true action. It's not really an economic well-being. It allows you to be financially independent. Relationships, challenge and growth opportunities, purpose and contributions. These are 4 items written about in the textbook that really help you to define and broaden out and flesh out that holistic context as far as the values go. Remember that you're making actions to take you toward this. You got to know what it is. Secondly, we have a future resource base, and it has people and physical. With the people part, it's really hard to tell people how they have to act. You can try it, but it doesn't usually work for me. We have to more get people support by being clear on how do we as an individual or an organization have to behave to gain their support, whether it's financial or as a customer or a supplier or a client. We have to be seen, and you can write it out, whatever makes sense to you, but it needs to be owned and by all of your decision makers. Some of the things could be, we need to be seen as honest, positive, professional, caring, prompt, etc. Whatever is most relevant to your decision makers and their context. Another point here, we have future resource base of the land. And if you're directly managing land, how will that land have to be functioning far into the future? How will those ecosystem processes have to be? Highly effective water cycle, mineral cycle, diversity of community plants and animals, catching sunlight. Describe that in detail on a piece of land you're managing. If you're not managing it directly, this is still relevant at a higher level where you would like to be supporting products that come from land that is improving, regenerating, building biological capital as opposed to the opposite, degenerating, losing biological capital. So, a recap, this context, what do we truly desire, needs 2 parts described in it. Values and that resource base, how does it have to be in the future? Written by, discussed by, wrestled with, but doesn't have to be wordsmithed. It's the concepts that are important, the decision makers. Any thoughts or questions to this point on any topic, and specifically holistic context related to decision making?
Hey, Byron, it's Abby. We have a couple that have come in. Durakan from Turkey asks, how is the ends and means discourse after the removal of forms of production? Isn't it too long of a distance now between quality of life and concrete decisions and actions? What do you think?
So let me back up here to that slide. We have 2 items here, quality of life or values, and then future resource base. In the first 2 textbooks before the 3rd edition, which is out now, there was a piece in the middle that said forms of production. And what it was quality of life was really getting at the deep values. And the middle one, forms of production, was kind of the general to-dos. And then you would test specific to-dos or filter specific to-dos or actions to see if they would keep you within context. Just for sake of simplicity, there was more questions and it was more confusing. So that was taken out. But now to your question, Durakan, forms of production, general to-dos, that middle piece that's out, either build that into quality of life values, broaden it out a little bit to include those, or separate it off into action to be filtered or checked or tested. But in training and making it simpler without confusion, that's why we went this. That's why a lot of accredited professionals struggle with it, and Ellen and Jody actually wrote the textbook this way. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Byron. Go ahead, Jody.
Yeah, I just to add on to what he said, the reason we did that was because just there were too many how-tos. When people would describe future, the forms of production, and the reason you don't want to have those in there is because you need to run them through the context checks. If they're already in there, you're not going to check them or test them because they're already there, and you really need to. So that was one reason why we did it. And so Byron was right. There's some things that we were expressing in there that really are quality of life. I mean, that things that really drive us, that make us get out of bed in the morning. Those things were really there, and they could go in quality of life. But other than that, they were things that we actually should do, that they need to be in our strategic plans each year. It's just the way we keep things moving.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jody. Oh, sorry, Byron, I have one more.
I think Jody faded out a little there, so.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
Well, that was great. That was loud and clear, and I am typing the responses into our Q&A panel, taking notes on what you and Jody are saying for others who want to follow along. Grant Timms asks, how often or what indicators are there when a group should revisit these?
If you have main decision makers change, they need to be revisited. Keep in mind too, not only are there wholes within wholes, family, farm, individual, business, there are levels of decision makers. So on a farm, ranch operation, you may have, for certain decisions, it's a high level group that are the decision makers. But yet on a day-to-day basis, the newest person on the farm, or the one with the less duties, or all people on the farm make decisions that relate to whether that farm or ranch will be successful or not. So all people who are decision makers at whatever level of decision making they are, yearly, daily, all about managing one enterprise or even within a piece of one enterprise, all people should be involved in the development of the context if they're decision makers at any level. How often it should be reviewed? Anytime there's changeover in employees or staff or people or volunteers, they should be brought on. Now maybe, and you'll have to feel it out, it may be, here, this is our context as you work here, volunteer here, keep this in mind. Or it could be a total sit down and say, once a year, we need to review these because we have enough new people here. It could also be used as a way, if you hire somebody or thinking of bringing somebody on, here's what we're about. Do you think you fit in this? Let them self-screen. So it's got several uses there.
Awesome. Thank you, Byron. And then Helen Lewis from Australia, I believe. Helen, if I messed that up, I apologize. But she says, I ask people to brainstorm the forms of production, business systems, and behaviors outside of the context, which helps make the holistic context reality.
Helen, I would agree. There's nothing wrong with doing that. There are so many ways of helping people think through making decisions. Holistic management came out of agriculture and the environment and has some missing environmental keys. And then it is part of many other examples of managing complexity. There are a lot of things to draw on out there to pull all this information together, and I'd encourage people to do it. The key, though, is to bring it back to the simple, do you have a whole? Are you clear on what you're managing? And do those decision makers have a context? Do they have a way to check decisions to go toward that? That's kind of the core competency of holistic management. Feel free to add how you do that. Like my example of drawing a line to separate actions and goals. There's lots of ways to do that. There's lots of good ways to help people figure out what are their deep values. Thanks for the comment.
Yeah, we just have one more from Richard King, my friend in California. And he likes the forms of production. He says, listing all the kinds of plans under forms of productions needed to create that quality of life are not how-tos. So another comment, but.
Wouldn't argue with that. When we have people that have been trained as holistic management evolves through the years, we learn to like different pieces. That's fine. Be clear in your training, Richard, on when you're adding, how you're doing it, and what it's helping with to help clarify the context. Again, the changes were made, as Jody said, to help in the initial instruction. There are, as I tried to say, the form of production was confusing, but it had value. Build it in where you see fit to the values or into some of the preparation work. That's fine.
Great. We're good to go. Yep.
This next section, I've got a few extra slides in here. I may go through them a little quicker. It was if we had extra time, but so do not worry if I skip a couple or don't explain them fully. They could each take a little while. With conventional, or the way we just typically make decisions, we do a lot of things. I'm listing some of them here, and probably not all of them. We learn from others. We do our own research. Even as adults, we feel a pressure from peers sometimes. We do a cost-benefit analysis, which is not a whole financial plan, but it's certainly one way to look at it financially. We do try to use all knowledge, existing science and knowledge out there. We gather everything we can. Sometimes that's done very quickly on a simple decision. Other times it takes some research. And that continues. And so none of that is avoided in making a decision holistically. What we want to do, though, is make sure that toward the end, when we make that final choice, we've really thought through it from all angles. We've got to make sure it's all three of those items there for soundness. You can't have an economic decision that's sound but is not good for the environment, or it's not a sound decision, or for the people, or vice versa. A really good environmental decision that's sound but it is not economically sound, it's a short-term solution at best. So we're truly looking for those things that are sound all the way around. And there are a few checks that we need to think through if we haven't already done it, or sometimes even if we have, at the end, right before we make a choice. We run through these fairly quickly so we see the forest and not get too involved in just the trees. These things help us make sure we've gone back and looked at everything. These have just stood the test of time, of 50 or 60 years of holistic management being used with land managers and non-land managers around the world. Some of these are financial, some are not. Let's look at the financials first. The quick overview here is we look at what we call the weak link financial. Holistic management gives a way for you within an enterprise, say a market garden or a sheep enterprise or even an off-farm job, within an enterprise, where should we spend money first? That's what weak link financial is about. This is huge. We can spend forever. Where should we prioritize our expenses? A second one, what a lot of us do most all the time anyway, is just where do we get the biggest return for our time spent? Marginal reaction, our time and money spent. The third one, this is where we actually compare enterprises. Do I do a market garden enterprise versus a sheep enterprise versus an off-farm job? And at what level do I mix the time? How much money do I make? What percentage of our overall income comes from each? Holistic management uses this gross profit analysis to say, where do I blend and what enterprises do I do? So weak link financials within an enterprise. Gross profit analysis is which ones do we do? Within our context, energy and money that we're using, what is its source and how will it be used? Are we investing soundly to protect that future resource base and create it, either on our farm or nationally or regionally, internationally? These are 4 financial questions that we really take a look at. They're not always all relevant, but when they are, we need to make sure we've looked at them. Now, I've got a couple slides here that I'm not going to spend much time on. Financial weak length, a little more depth to that though, is in any enterprise, especially related directly to the sun. Are we converting the sunlight into something, a resource? Secondly, are we making it into a product we can sell? And third, are we getting it sold? There are only 3 links in this chain from a solar dollar, which Alan says is the only thing that will sustain civilization, from the sunlight to a solar dollar. I could ask you to list me 30 different things to spend on, and if you wrote them all on a piece of paper, I'd throw it into one of each of these 3 buckets. Some would go into, are we converting sunlight to a resource? Some would go into, are we creating a better product? Some would go into, are we marketing? But now our job is to identify which of those 3 links is the weak one, and anything that we could do that's in the other 2 buckets is out of order to do now. So this financial weak link really helps us decide what do we spend on within an enterprise and where. Now, these photos here, I'm going to skip through. This is more detail than we have time for about how to decide. This is all in the holistic management training materials, but how to decide where to spend, to prioritize it. Marginal reaction. Should I do fixed fence, go to a training, research buying a new piece of equipment, computer? Right away, if we're really clear on our context, it's easier for us to know where do we spend our time. Sometimes we want to do the one that is not the greatest return. Overall, we continually need to be doing our time and money on items of the greatest return. Gross profit analysis. This is what I'll discuss briefly and skip a couple slides too. Remember, this is where we're deciding what enterprises do I do. In this case, do we graze this pasture or do we make hay off it? Which one will contribute most to the overheads of the business? The real key here is in holistic management, we have a little different way than an accountant of looking at how we figure which one will cover the business overheads. And it gives us a truer sense of where we're making our money to go toward covering the overhead costs. We define them a little different than an accountant would, but it's a very powerful tool when done that way. This last financial one, energy and money source and use. Is the energy or money to be used in this action derived from the most appropriate source? Is this requiring us to take out more debt, more loan, and we just got paid off? Or no, we can do that, but we've thought it through. And will the way in which it will be used keep us within our context? And will it be cyclical, need to be repeated over and over, or consumptive? We need more of it each time. These are the 4 financial questions that are not always asked when we do our research and all of our thinking and preparation. And some of these take research up front before we really think through everything at once. A brief look at the, if they'll come up here, the financial checks. So I'll talk about them while I use either a mouse that won't change it. This is what we all run into with technology sometimes, isn't it? My remote or actually my laptop. The financial, non-financial checks. I'm going to go out of this program briefly, and then I'm going to go back into it. And then we can move again. And here we are. Cause and effect. Many times we don't really ask if there's a problem. And if there's not, great, move on, doesn't apply. But if there is, if we've got a problem that needs addressed, the actions we're considering taking, are they going to the root cause or are they addressing a symptom or an effect? Important question, should be asked up front many times before you do any thinking about a financial problem. Weak link. If we take this action, not only do we have to think about it financially, but will it cause challenges or problems with the people, the social links that we need with people in our resource base? And if it's a action that is helping to either have more of or less of an actual living organism out there biologically, will this action either strengthen it by supporting the weak link in its life cycle or reduce it by attacking it at the weak link in its life cycle? Are we truly creating lasting wealth by having it not only be sustainable, but regenerate as opposed to degenerate land or people relationships or other assets? And finally, a gut feel. This is where we really finalize it. How do we feel about it now? Sometimes a gut feel will overrule some of the more objective questions from up front, but it's all right. It's very legitimate. So a couple items here, and then we'll open up for questions here again. Sometimes it helps to track your decisions. If it's a very important one in a business, it can help get clear on making it, and you've got a record of why you made it later, if it works or doesn't work. And it can help provide early warning signs, help you think through that will tell you if it's going the way it should or not. Another example of a testing record. So you can choose any upcoming decision, go through the context checks quickly, and it may tell you right away. You feel like most of them it passes, it fails. It's very often we need more information. Some of the questions don't apply and some we just don't know. There's nothing wrong with rapidly going through the context checks of a potential decision or several options just to see where you stand. A lot of times you learn that you're actually asking the wrong question. If the answer is no down there, I'll read through those first. I might need more information. It's real often we don't have the right question we're asking, or we need to clarify it, or we don't have the right people involved. Or are we really considering our entire whole that's available to us? If the answer is yes, I feel like that's good. The group says that yes, that's good. The decision makers related to that decision. Well, then don't just go do it and run off. In holistic management, there's a fourth piece here, and this is the quickest to go through of the four. But how do we know we can guarantee what we're doing will happen? Well, we don't know, but the way we can best help control it is this feedback loop. We plan it, we make our choice, we decide what are the things to monitor, identify the earliest warning signs that will tell us if we're on track or especially if we're off track, so that we can take the earliest measures we need to control it. And if we really can't control it, then we need to do a total replan. But this is a huge piece. It ensures we're staying within our holistic context. So we just went through this third piece. We first did the whole, then we did the context. We've just done the context checks, and in the last 30 seconds, the feedback loop, which is easy to think through, but just as important. Got time for a couple quick questions, and then we'll wrap up and summarize.
Great, thanks, Byron. We have one from Bart, our friend in Belgium. He says, just a thought, if there isn't a problem, why are we making a decision? There probably is an underlying reason.
If there's not a problem, this is just saying in the action you're considering doing, if there is a problem that needs to be addressed, make sure you're addressing the cause, not the effect. In many of our actions we're taking, whether we're sitting down formally and taking time to think through and do the holistic context checks very formally, or whether it's on the fly, we're just know our context so well, we're making choices. Many times there's not a main problem. We're just going about life making choices. And so my point there was simply that specific context check of is there a problem doesn't apply in many cases. But if it does, it's got to be addressed.
Gotcha. Thank you, Byron. Helen Lewis from Australia says, with the social weak link, we check the people who we influence or are influenced by as well. And with the sustainability question, we refer to the future resource base question mark.
Say that one more time at the beginning.
Sure. With the social weak link, we check the people who we influence or are influenced by as well. And within the sustainability question, we refer to the future resource base.
Oh, sure, Helen. And you know, all of these things are a real a guide. It's not a formula, but so you're right. As you're making a choice, be clear who the decision makers are. So they're making the choice, and we don't have somebody who's in there making the decision who shouldn't be. For example, maybe a banker or a lawyer. Where are they? Are they a decision maker or an accountant, or are they resource based? But then, yes, as you're looking for those weak links with other people, I'm certainly going to look strongly at my people in that resource base. And then when you get to the sustainability piece, um, for sure, there also you can, if that's another place that it reminds you to think about, that's the real key. It's just reminding you to think about, are we being economically, ecologically, and socially sound all the way along? It doesn't always have to be done the exact same way if it gets the job done.
Awesome. So Glenn Straight says the feedback loop seems to be a long process. If so, how does it factor into decision making?
When you make a choice, many times it's like our financial plan. We put it in the drawer and we look at it a year later and see if it happened. If this is really a answer that's to a problem specifically, but just any action we take, if it's important enough, we should have a way to monitor to say, is this going to address the problem, the marketing problem, the grazing problem, the financial challenge? The process begins right there. Identify the early warning signs, just like you would with ecological monitoring. What will tell you if this is working or not? And then it's just a matter of monitoring. And that could be easy or long-term, short-term, involved or not, depends on the decision.
Right, and Byron, we always look for the earliest warning indicators, right? That's why we monitor the soil surface to see if we're going to get that earliest indicator. So the feedback loop is ideally very short, right?
Yes, you're looking for the earliest sign. Now that may over time take a while, but that is part of the decision making. I guess that's the concept to get is we haven't made the choice and now we're just going about making more choices and maintaining the business. We are watching to see if choices we've made are taking us doing what they need to do and keeping us within context.
Right. That was the end of the questions. And I get really excited about that because I think that is the key to truly thinking holistically and working with complex systems versus always trying to be reductionist. When you know that each action you take or each structure you implement in your operation or in your life is going to create all these other variables, right? That was Byron's definition of complexity in the beginning. So we always have to monitor because with each action now it's all changed and we have to look and see if we're still going in the right direction. Is that right, Byron?
Yeah, that's right. Management is not just being the worker on the job. Even the worker's managing the part he's responsible for. But if you truly are in managing a farm or ranch, this is what comes with the territory. And it takes thinking through these things and a few other things here. So maybe I'll summarize then, Abby, if we've got no others. Great. And getting toward the top of the hour and wrap this up.
Great.
So the summary here is, I had mentioned to you there were 4 key things. We said it's harder than rocket science, but yet it's common sense. Identify what we're managing. That's the whole. Clearly define what we desire. That's have a holistic context. Filter options or actions so that you stay within that. Those are your context checks. The old testing guidelines, but more up-to-date knowledge that's better descriptive, context checks. And then the feedback loop, monitor these decisions to assure desired outcomes. So that's a summary in an hour, a high-level overview of holistic decision-making. Now, however, if you are managing land, there are more holistic management foundations, excuse me, that you need to be aware of. These other 3 key insights all relate to the environment. Alan, his whole concept of brittleness, that land responds differently to actions taken on it, is so important to understand. Totally redefines the definition of best management practices. Best management practices become make holistic decisions. Then you've also got predator-prey relationships when you're specifically dealing with animals and livestock and creating grasslands, which, by the way, then created the croplands of the world. So we're not just dealing with the back 40 when we talk about grasslands. And the concepts of timing that Alan picked up from André Voisin in France. If you're managing land, you've got to understand those 3 key environmental insights. You also have to begin to have an understanding of the ecosystem processes. because, as Abby said, these are the earliest warning signs of if the land is improving or not improving, what direction it's moving. You've also got to understand, and this is really exciting, that as you use your creativity or money or labor to use any of those four main tools, fire, rest, 1,000 forms of technology, or living organisms, managing the large organisms, the macro animals that we can manage and create habitat for the small microbes, it's really fun to realize if you understand the brittleness you live in, the results of these tools, the probable results can be known. You still monitor because everything's different and it's a sliding scale. But we start to have a way to manage complexity. So you apply the decision making and the financial planning. If you're not managing land, you add all of that basics of decision making and financial planning, and you can use it in a non-land management situation. But we really don't use it. It's the way we think. It's how we're intuitively managing. If you're managing land, you need these, not only financial planning, but the three planning procedures in the body of knowledge of holistic management: planned grazing, holistic land planning, ecological monitoring, to really know if you're moving land forward. So you've got to put all those items together. So how are you making decisions toward desired outcomes? Do you have something that will guide you, or are you kind of floundering one way or another? And are you moving from linear to holistic thinking and decision making? Which would mean having defined the whole, developed a context that does not have specific actions in there. It's values, not action based, that therefore allows you through context checks to help choose better actions. That's really all holistic management is managing complexity, because it's always changing. Separating out values from actions, not just chasing actions all day, and understanding the environmental principles that go with it and the planning procedures that go with it in the body of knowledge of holistic management. So that is an hour of your time. We really appreciate it. Jody, thank you very much for participating, and Abby, we'll turn it back over to you.
Right. Well, I'm going to turn it right back over to Paige and just say again, thank you for everyone who came here. We had literally, I won't list all the countries, but I went through and tallied up at least the people I know, and I'm glad I know a lot of you on here. We had every continent represented on this call today. So proud to be here with you, and thank you all for all you're doing. Paige?
Thank you. Thank you to Byron. Thank you to Jody and Abby as well. Thank you to all for attending today. Just a couple of quick wrap-up notes. On the screen, you will see our contact info. I think most of you know how to get a hold of us, but in case you don't, you can reach out via email. You can always reach out via the community platform as well and find us all. And just a quick note about our next session. It will be held Friday, May 29th, 1 to 2 p.m. Mountain Time. That will be hosted by the Savory Institute with speaker Sheila Cook, 3LM, and also Julie Mettenberg, an accredited professional out of Kansas. The topic for that discussion will be why farmers aren't moving through your sales funnel. We hope to see you then. Once again, the recording will be sent out in the next 24 hours and also posted to the community platform. Thank you again for attending, and have a good rest of your day. Bye now.
Bye, everyone. Thank you again.